Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Wednesday, February the 3rd, 2021. Yesterday, I was talking about the heroic representative from the state of New York, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and the torment that she suffered, a torment that refuses to go away. After the Capitol in Washington, D.C. Was stormed by MAGAites, white supremacists, and other deplorable people. Well, guess what? She wasn't in the Capitol when that happened. This is from Nicaragua at Red State. We've reported various aspects of the account of Representative AOC, what happened to her on January 6th during the breach of the Capitol, but there's some very critical facts that have been missing from her story that I wanted to talk about here. The story, as it was initially related by AOC, suggested that she was about to be assassinated by rioters in her office in a video that has been viewed over 6 million times. Newsweek even claimed that's what AOC said. Quote, Ocasio-Cortez said that rioters actually entered her office, forcing her to take refuge inside her bathroom, and her legislative director, Geraldo Bonilla Chavez, told her to hide, run, and hide. And so I run back into my office, Ocasio-Cortez said. I slam my door. There's another kind of like back area to my office, and I open it, and there's a closet in a bathroom, and I jump into my bathroom. As it turns out, however, AOC said in her Instagram drama that the person who came to her office was a Capitol police officer, but she denigrated the officer who came to help, claiming he didn't feel right and that he was looking at her in all of this anger and hostility. Her staffer reportedly wondered if he would have to fight the officer and suggested he might put them in a vulnerable situation. So basically, this story is about hyping the danger to the members and trying to say to people that they still have to fear those inconsiderate, uncaring police, even when they're coming to help you. She's even been called out by folks on the left for the effort to demonize the officer and Senator Ted Cruz. But a few important things to note that seem to have been left out of the whole story. AOC wasn't even in the Capitol building when all the action was going down. If she was in her office, she was in the Cannon building, which is nearby, but a different building. But of course, many didn't get the logistics and just assumed that she was in the Capitol building. According to Republican Representative Nancy Mace of South Carolina, who has an office in the same hall as AOC, 2 doors away, there were never any rioters in their hall, so there was never any physical danger from rioters coming in at any point. Mace tweeted, AOC made clear she didn't know who was at the door. Breathless attempts by media to fan fictitious news flames are dangerous. My office is 2 doors down. Insurrectionists never stormed our hallway. Egregious doesn't even begin to cover it. Is there nothing the MSN won't politicize? AOC's building appears to have been briefly evacuated during the day as police checked on a nearby suspicious package that was later cleared. So her, quote, near-death experience, unquote, was an overreaction to a Capitol police officer knocking on her door to direct her to another building, the Longworth building, where she then stayed in the office of Representative Katie Porter. Instead of thanking the officer, she paints him as somehow a possible danger of which to be afraid. The Capitol Police were likely trying to evacuate the building quickly. It's possible the officer was focused on getting people out quickly, so likely didn't have time for all the niceties. So what do we know about Representative Katie Porter? This is from the New York Post, November 1st of last year. Democratic Representative Katie Porter dressed up as Batgirl on the same day as the historic vote on President Trump's impeachment, and critics accused her of making a mockery of Congress. The California Congresswoman donned the black superhero costume and mask for Halloween on Thursday, sitting in the House of Representatives next to freshman Representative Rashida Tlaib and other Democrats who were wearing regular DC garb. And there is a picture of Katie Porter here, who is in her 50s, and this is an unfortunate unfortunate choice. Porter, a member of the House Financial Services Committee, was seen voting on a bill to extend the terrorism risk insurance program in the superhero costume. Yes, this is how serious these clowns are taking impeachment, the National Republican Congressional Committee tweeted on Thursday. But Porter defended the stunt on Twitter, writing, "Taking my work in Congress seriously doesn't mean I take myself too seriously. To my kids, Luke, Paul, and Betsy, I'm still just mom. Seeing the bat signal on Halloween and putting on a goofy costume come with the territory. Oh, she's a mother. Oh, okay. Well, I don't know why anyone would possibly criticize her because she is a mother, as is Jen Psaki, who I will be getting to shortly. Okay, so trending on Twitter, Alexandria Ocasio-Smollett. Pretty good, as Larry David would say. Let's see. Politics trending. Alexandria Ocasio-Smollett, 30,000 tweets. Candace Owen tweeted, on a day in which Alexandria Ocasio-Smollett is trending, please never forget the time that AOC staged a photo shoot dressed all in white at a parking lot to spread lies about immigrant children in cages. Faking her own attempted murder was the next logical step. And there's someone has shown the picture of her looking oh so concerned. She's just overwhelmed by the inhumanity. She's about to burst into tears. Tricia Flanagan, Republican of New Jersey, tweeted, AOC literally said Senator Ted Cruz tried to murder her on January 6th, and now turns out she apparently wasn't even at the Capitol. If falsely accusing a fellow member of Congress of a felony doesn't call for expulsion, what does? Yes. Are the fact checkers at CNN and elsewhere on this case? PolitiFact, Snopes? I think that they will say that this charge is unproven. I think that that's what they'll go with. Yes, that there were a murderous band of deplorables, in the city, in the general area. So, no, it wasn't false. It wasn't false at all. No. Let's see. Molly Hemingway at the Federalist reminds us of something which has gone down the memory hole. When Senator Rand Paul, Republican of Kentucky, spoke against the constitutionality of the Democrats' impeachment trial of former President Donald Trump, he reminded his colleagues that Democrat elected officials had recently told their followers to attack Republicans. If Trump was to be impeached for asking followers to peacefully and patriotically make their voices heard by members of Congress on January 6th, what to do with Democrats' more incendiary rhetoric and actions, he wondered. Senator Kamala Harris solicited funds to bail out the rioters who destroyed Minneapolis during 2020 Summer of Rage. Representative Maxine Waters called on Democrats to seek out Republicans in public places and create a crowd and push back on them to let them know, quote, they're not welcome anymore, anywhere, unquote. The Bernie Sanders supporter who nearly killed House Republican Whip Steve Scalise at a baseball field in Virginia said he was motivated to kill for health care after Sanders and other Democrats had said the Republican health care plan was to kill many Americans. Senator Cory Booker told his supporters at one gathering in D.C. to, quote, please don't just come here today and then go home. Go to the Hill today, get up, and please get in the face of some Congress people, unquote. One example Paul left out of his excellent speech is even more relevant to next week's impeachment. Less than 1 year ago, Senator Chuck Schumer of New York led a mob on the steps of the Supreme Court while a case was being heard and tried to thwart the natural deliberation of justices by violently threatening two of them to rule in favor of his and other Democrats' preferred outcome. Quote, I want to tell you, Gorsuch, I want to tell you, Kavanaugh, you have released the whirlwind and you will pay the price. You don't know what hit you if you go forward with these awful decisions, unquote. The threat was so alarming that even leftist activists such as Lawrence Tribe condemned it. Schumer received a rare same-day rebuke from Chief Justice John Roberts, who said justices know that criticism comes with the territory, but threatening statements of this sort from the highest levels of government are not only inappropriate, they are dangerous. Then Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell condemned Schumer's remarks as astonishingly reckless and completely irresponsible. However, Senator Josh Hawley's efforts to censure Schumer for his violent threats were scuttled. The Washington Post write-up of Schumer's threats focused instead on Republican opposition to them. GOP seizes on Schumer's remarks, read the headline. Schumer's threats came just 17 months after the Supreme Court had been besieged and attacked by abortion activists upset at Kavanaugh's confirmation. Yes, like the January 6th event, the October 2018 siege also involved President Mike Pence being condemned by protesters. As he walked down the steps of the U.S. Senate following the vote to confirm Kavanaugh, the crowd greeted him with chants of shame. Across the street, hordes of protesters broke through a police barricade and attempted to beat down the 13-ton bronze doors of the court. Protesters included a topless woman with a Hitler mustache, of course, and another woman who scaled the Contemplation of Justice statue in front of the court and sat in her lap to the cheers of other protesters. Justices Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Elena Kagan, who attended Kavanaugh's immediate swearing-in, were hit with water bottles and tomatoes when their car left the court afterward. But I suppose this all comes down to equity, whether a protest is legitimate or not. And I think we know what the answer to that question is. Let's take a look at the chat. Don from Beyond says, I can't understand what's going on with mask wearing. Even where not mandated, 99% of people still wear face diapers. Could it be they like wearing them? I found something distressing happening to me lately. And I have to put on a mask to go into practically every building in Victoria. And I've gotten so used to wearing a mask that I often find myself, after having left the building, I'm 2-3 blocks down the street, and I realize I'm still wearing the mask. Hello to Head McNeck, Popcaso 88, and Ann Run. Head McNeck, so AOC, Head McNeck says, so AOC is the new David Hogg. Imagine my shock. Tony V says, in AOC's defense, she is crazy. Chocokin666 says, don't sociopaths lie for no apparent reason? Well, what's curious about this lie is that, did she really think she was not going to be found out? Because where AOC's office is a matter of public record. She could have said that she found herself in the Capitol for some reason when all this was going on. But no, she didn't say that. Brandon Smith reminds us that the average person lies more than 20 times a day. Someone talking about Puerto Rican independence. I just can't imagine, again, why the United States did not give Puerto Rico independence after, say, the Second World War, the same time that the Philippines was given its independence. Professor Paul says, hi. Anran predicts that AOC will pay no price for this. She probably won't. Certainly not in the media. Anran says her not being there is just a small or meaningless detail. We all know it would have happened as she described it if she had been there. Chococan666 says, I'll bet Spengler or someone else found that continuous hoax was a sign of a crumbling culture. Oh, okay. They really love abortion, says Chococan666. Yes, they consider it to be sacrament, actually. And so let's move on with some other political news. I found out that I have been mispronouncing the name of the new White House press secretary, Jen, not Jennifer, but Jen Psaki. It turns out it is pronounced Psaki. The P is silent, like the P in toilet. I listened to an entire press conference of hers today, and she's an up-talker. Along with a vocal fry, she is an up-talker, and she has an alarming, she keeps using this phrase, at this point in time. Did she watch a lot of video about Watergate? You know, at this point in time means now. But I suppose the 4-word version sounds more authoritative, perhaps. Jen Psaki also has a curious habit of referring to people as humans. If you go to her Twitter site, she says she is the mother of 2 humans. And in this press conference I watched today, she was using this word humans in order to refer to people. I don't know, what is the purpose of that? Red State reminds us that as far as problematical tweets go, on August 5th of last year, Jen Psaki tweeted, "Only in 2020 does Lady G get to push a bunch of debunked conspiracy theories while questioning Sally Q. Yates, aka an American hero." When I read that initially, says Nick Arama, I thought that she was referring, I thought, why is she tweeting about Lady Gaga? But that isn't who Lady G refers to. It's rumor mongering and a homophobic slap at Senator Lindsey Graham, if you check the hashtag, and was referencing to his question of former acting Attorney General Sally Yates, who is most definitely not a hero. Maybe she was confusing Sally Yates with that astronaut, Sally Ride. I would not be surprised. I was talking about the increasing vulgarity of American culture yesterday, and Bill Clinton had a press secretary who was named Dee Dee, but now America has a press secretary to the president who sounds like a teenage girl. Let's talk about, oh yes, a little deeper subject here, the Great Realignment. And this is a piece from And Magazine by Charles Faddis. And he begins, if you were like most Americans, you probably feel like the world around you is more than slightly off kilter these days. The very ground under your feet may seem to be shifting. Things you knew were true have turned out to be lies. Institutions like Congress, the media, and even the FBI have not only disappointed you, but in many cases betrayed you. You are disillusioned, you are disoriented, you are unsure where all this is going. There is a very good reason. We are in the middle of what I call the Great Realignment, and our lives will never be the same. For many decades in American politics and public life, the divisions in politics seemed relatively clear. Republicans stood for individual freedom, free enterprise, small government, strong defense, and lower spending. Democrats stood for a much more activist government, which was focused on helping the disadvantaged, domestic social programs, and a general liberalization of society and social norms. If you think back to popular images of the division in our society during the Vietnam War, you can form a snapshot picture of how that all looked. It will be, as all simplifications are, in many respects inaccurate, yet it will still capture essential truths. This is the America that was, but is no more. A great many things have changed. First and foremost, though, our economy has changed. We were a nation decades ago defined by the middle class, which represented the great preponderance of Americans, and was based on an industrial economy the likes of which the world had never seen. That economy ceased to exist long ago. In its place, we now have something fundamentally different. We are no longer a nation of prosperous middle-class households. We are increasingly a nation of serfs and feudal lords. Republican and Democratic leaders may continue to pay lip service to old issues and utter the same stale platitudes, But the truth is that there's virtually no difference between many of them. They are the uniparty, and their loyalty lies not with the people or with a cause, but with the almighty dollar. The median American family income is roughly $70,000 a year. Adjusted for inflation, that figure has hardly changed in 50 years. Keep in mind that 50 years ago, that family income was in most cases coming from the salary of a single breadwinner. It is now increasingly taking both parents in a family working to bring home the same amount of money. Among the top 1% of American families, the average annual household income is $1.7 million. Elon Musk, Tesla's CEO, alone made almost $600 million last year. As the economy has changed and been hollowed out in recent decades, vast amounts of wealth that would otherwise be held by the middle class has flowed into the hands of the rich. Estimates are that the top 1% now hold at least $50 trillion that would otherwise be in the hands of average Americans. As the elite has grown ever richer and less attached to the idea of the United States as an independent nation state, its goals and ambitions have become less and less attached to the welfare of the average American man or woman. Increasingly, what the elite wants is in direct opposition to what the average American wants. You may pine for the days when the things you bought were made nearby at the factory where your uncle worked, lasted a lifetime, and could be bought from a local mom and pop business. Amazon has absolutely no interest in undoing a business model which has made its founder, Jeff Bezos, one of the richest men on the planet. It is not just that this class of oligarchs is richer than anyone ever imagined possible, however. With this money and with the capabilities of new technologies, these modern-day robber barons increasingly have the power to steamroll all opposition, manipulate any outcome, and crush all opposition. If you speak against them, you will be canceled. Your Twitter account will be blocked. Your Facebook posts will be censored. In the very near future, almost certainly, you will find that your email accounts have been shut down. He concludes that a reckoning is coming for the Democrats as well. Pelosi and her henchmen are quite happy to continue to pay lip service to social justice and equality as they milk the system and continue to get filthy rich. Out there in the street, though, there are a great many people who feel truly disenfranchised and actually believe in the slogans they are chanting and the causes they are supporting. They aren't willing anymore to simply go home, sit down, shut up, and wait to be called upon again in 4 years. They want change, too. The nation is aligning itself politically on a fault line. On one side are a handful of very wealthy, very powerful people. On the other side is everyone else. The great realignment is underway. True populism is rising. The nation will never be the same again. And I suppose the GOP can get in front of this, or they will be trampled and disappear like the Whigs. As far as it's difficult to talk about, how much people earn nowadays, because inflation has destroyed our understanding of value. Now, the official inflation rate is just simply a mockery. There's lots of things it doesn't include, like medical care and the cost of university and real estate. Yes. So how much did it cost to buy a house in America 50 years ago? In some places, houses could be bought for a few $1,000s. But now, in many places in America, house prices of $1 million and much more are considered simply routine. This is one of the reasons why inflation is wicked, because it makes it possible for our leaders to say, oh, you're doing just fine. Look at how much money you're making. In the past, people like you were making a fraction of what you are today. Well, how far does that dollar go? Speaking of which, the elite and big money, let's talk about Janet Yellen, who is the first female Secretary of the Treasury. Yeah. Who cares? Okay, now we've had the first female Secretary of the Treasury, so I'm waiting for the first non-white female Secretary of the Treasury, the first lesbian female Secretary of the Treasury, the first non-binary female Treasury Secretary, the first immigrant all the way down the line. Chuck Ross wrote in the Daily Caller, January 28th, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen received more than $800,000 in speaking fees from a hedge fund that has become embroiled in the saga over stock trades for video game retailer GameStop, according to her financial disclosures. Citadel, a hedge fund founded by Ken Griffin, a major GOP donor, paid Yellen $810,000 to speak at several events from October 2019 to October 2020, according to Yellen's filings with the Office of Government Ethics. The Chicago-based hedge fund paid Yellen $292,500 for a speech on October 17, 2019, $180,000 for one on December 3rd of that year, and $337,500 to speak at a series of webinars held from October 9th to 27th, 2020. Almost $300,000 for a speech. I don't know if this speech were announcing cold fusion, say, yeah, I'd say that would be worth it. Is anyone really going to pretend that Janet Yellen was paid this much money over the period of a year because she's just such a scintillating speaker, that her insights into the economy are non-pari? No. Anyway, Chuck Ross continues. Citadel is invested heavily in Melvin Capital, a hedge fund that was reportedly on the brink of bankruptcy this week due to a surge in GameStop share prices. Reddit users on a page called Wall Street Bets encouraged purchases of GameStop shares in order to exploit Melvin Capital's short position on the company. A buying spree from retail investors forced Melvin to cover its short position by buying shares of GameStop at elevated prices. Citadel and another firm, 72 Point, invested $2.75 billion in Melvin this week after it lost 30% of its capital. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said Wednesday that Yellen, who was confirmed by the Senate last week, is monitoring the situation. There is no indication that Yellen has intervened to help Citadel or Melvin, or that she plans to, but calls are growing on all sides of the issue for more regulation from the federal government. Yes, the fox guarding the henhouse, I believe, how this is described. And yes, more on that. This is from Reuters yesterday. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is calling a meeting of top financial regulators this week to discuss market volatility driven by retail trading in shares of GameStop, silver, and other stocks favored on social media. Yellen will convene the heads of the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Reserve, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. Yellen sought and received permission from ethics lawyers before calling the meeting, according to a document seen by Reuters, along with clearance to engage on wide-ranging issues in the financial services industry. Yellen's decision to seek the waiver followed a report by Reuters that because of speaking fees she was paid by a key player in the GameStop saga, hedge fund Citadel LLC, she may need permission to deal with matters involving the firm. Treasury spokeswoman Alexandra Lamanna said, Secretary Yellen believes the integrity of markets is important and has asked for a discussion of recent volatility in financial markets and whether recent activities are consistent with investor protection and fair and efficient markets. Nothing could possibly be more fair than having Janet Yellen oversee possible regulation to protect a company that gave her $810,000 for 2 speeches and some webinars over the period of 1 year. And we've already seen the response. Oh, if you think that Janet Yellen can be bought off by $810,000, what's implied there is that $810,000 is peanuts. I mean, come on. Imagine getting all bent out of shape over a measly $810,000. I mean, I spend that much money for fresh flowers for my 4 homes every year. This is from Newsweek today. Lauren Giella fact-checked. Is Jen Psaki's husband or brother a Citadel portfolio manager? Yeah. Additionally, it was reported, we know about that. Okay. Twitter users have drawn a connection between Psaki and a Citadel employee named Jeff Psaki, claiming that they are husband and wife or brother and sister. The speculation of Jen and Jeff's relationship began after people worried about a conflict of interest between Yellen and later Psaki when advising President Joe Biden on the GameStop situation. In a press conference, a reporter asked Psaki if there were plans for Yellen to recuse herself from advising the president on GameStop and the whole Robin Hood situation. Psaki responded by referring to a statement put out by the SEC and broad economic team on the Treasury Department. A tweet from Raina Nakamoto, Jen Psaki's brother, Jeff Psaki, is literally a portfolio manager at Citadel. It's all too conspicuous. Now the possible whistleblower claiming the Citadel and the White House commanded RH to stop the buys doesn't seem so preposterous. But the facts. Jen Psaki is not married to Jeff Psaki. She's married to Jeffrey Metcher, a Democratic political advisor she met in 2006. According to a wedding announcement in the New York Times in 2010, Psaki's father, James Psaki, is a retired real estate developer. In a statement to Newsweek, a source close to Jeff said that Jen and Jeff Psaki are distant second cousins, but have no relationship and have never met or spoken to each other. A source close to Jen Psaki confirmed that Jen does not have a relationship with Jeff and has no plans to start one. Well, that is good to know. I'm glad that's cleared up. I suppose what's alarming about this is simply the assumption that everyone in the Biden administration is bent. And let's talk about the new Stalinism, neo-Stalinism. This is a story from the CBC today. Canada labels the Proud Boys, other neo-Nazi groups, as terrorists. Move comes after media reports linked Proud Boys members to those who stormed U.S. Capitol last month. This is a story by John Paul Tasker. Public Safety Minister Bill Blair announced today that the federal government will designate 13 groups as terrorist entities, adding some white nationalist and neo-Nazi groups to a list already populated with militant Islamist organizations. Has this story been changed? No, it hasn't. Let's see. The federal government now classify the Proud Boys, a neo-fascist organization with chapters in Canada and the U.S., the Atomwaffen Division, AWD, a group that calls for acts of violence against racial, religious, and ethnic groups, and the Base, another neo-Nazi organization that advocates for violence to incite a race war, as terrorist entities under the criminal code. I must say that I have never heard of AWB or the Base, which is a curious name because that's what Al-Qaeda means, literally the base. So the Proud Boys are not only neo-Nazis, they are neo-fascist. George Orwell noted as early as 1946 that fascism, it's a meaningless word. It means something we don't like. But are the fact checkers going to be sicked on this CBC story? How exactly are the Proud Boys neo-fascist? I tweeted the author of this story, John Paul Tasker, and asked him, and to be specific, how they are neo-fascist. Fascism is a political ideology that disappeared in 1945. There have been dictatorships since that time. There have been nationalist dictatorships since that time, but they are not fascist. Now, the Proud Boys are very much civic nationalists. Their leader, who turns out to be a Fed, Enrique Tarrio, identifies as Hispanic, Puerto Rican, something like that. There are lots of brown and black people in the Proud Boys, and their view is we're all in this together. But I suppose it's rather like saying it's okay to be white. Oh, if you say it's okay to be white, then you must be a white supremacist and quite possibly a neo-Nazi. Back to the story, the government considers these three groups, along with another new addition, the Russian Imperial Movement, a Russian paramilitary group with ties to neo-Nazi groups worldwide, as ideologically motivated, violent extremists. Yeah. How about those genuine neo-Nazis who serve as the muscle of the government of the Ukraine? The Canadian government have any interest in them? No, I don't think so. The Canadian Security Intelligence Service, or CSIS, defines the term as extremism driven by a range of grievances and ideas from across the traditional ideological spectrum. I don't see Antifa on this list for some reason. I wonder why that might be. No matter the ideological motivation, they're all hateful, intolerant, and as we've seen, they can be highly dangerous, Blair said, adding that he hopes expanding the terrorist list will send a message to groups intent on sowing division and hate and causing harm, that their actions will not be tolerated by law enforcement. No, I guess unless they're Black Lives Matter supporters in Canada or supporters of Native Indians doing very dangerous things like blocking railways. Blair said their violent actions and rhetoric are fueled by, wait for it, white supremacy, anti-Semitism, racism, homophobia, Islamophobia, and misogyny. And unfortunately, often in combination of all of the above. On several different occasions, we've seen the tragic results that this type of extremism can bring to Canadian soil, Blair said, referencing the 2017 Quebec City mosque attack and the 2018 Toronto van attack. 2018 Toronto van attack. Oh, that was Muslim terror. But yeah, no mention of this in the story for some reason. A group is added to the terrorist list of Canada's security intelligence agencies after an extremely rigorous probe find reasonable grounds to believe that an entity has knowingly participated in or facilitated a terrorist activity. Yes, banks can now freeze assets and police can charge anyone who financially or materially supports such a group. Neo-fascist, that's the sort of thing that a Stalinist would say. And we see the media increasingly adopting neo-Stalinist language. Let's look at this use of the term white supremacy. What is white supremacy? How can it possibly be defined? Obviously, a state of white supremacy does not exist in the United States of America for all sorts of reasons, which are obvious, and it doesn't exist in Canada as well. But supposedly, these countries are dominated by white supremacists. Now, white people are, let's say, slandered every day by the media and by influential media types. But that's not important because apparently white people hold all the power. And moving on. Yes, I spoke last week about Canada. It would appear that Canada is going to be setting up in the near future a ministry of truth. And America is not far behind, or might not be far behind. This is from Joshua Klein at Breitbart. The New York Times published an essay on Tuesday detailing a range of recommendations for the Biden administration to adopt to fix the reality crisis and de-radicalize citizens, including setting up a reality czar and truth commission. America was famously founded in a revolt against hereditary monarchy. So why all of these czars? Isn't it insulting and demeaning? The essay, penned by Times technology columnist Kevin Roose, accuses millions of Americans of embracing hoaxes, lies, and collective delusions for questioning how to unite a country where these millions have chosen to create their own version of reality. Quote, I worry that unless the Biden administration treats conspiracy theories and disinformation as the urgent threats they are, our parallel universes will only drift further apart, and the potential for violent unrest and civic dysfunction will only grow, unquote. The author then states he contacted several experts seeking what actions the Biden administration could take to help fix our truth-challenged information ecosystem, or at least prevent it from getting worse. Joan Donovan, a research director at Harvard University's Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy, suggested that the Biden administration set up a truth commission led by those familiar with extremist factions, including white supremacist groups and far-right militias behind the January 6th U.S. Capitol riot in order to investigate the event. Donovan describes such an effort as similar to the 9/11 Commission. The author then claims that experts suggested using new and narrower labels to distinguish between different types of movements and levels of influence within those movements. Another recommendation Roos claims to have received from these experts is for the Biden administration to create a task force to tackle disinformation. And again, they're not using the word disinformation correctly, and domestic extremism. It sounds a little dystopian, the idea of a reality czar, I'll grant, writes Roos, but let's hear them out. Such a task force may also hold recurring meetings with tech platforms to push for structural changes, including formulating the means for such platforms to share information about QAnon and other conspiracy theory communities with both researchers and government agencies. This task force could also meet regularly with tech platforms and push for structural changes that could help those companies tackle their own extremism and misinformation problems. So is it misinformation or disinformation? For example, it could formulate safe harbor exemptions that would allow platforms to share data about QAnon and other conspiracy theory communities with researchers and government agencies without running afoul of privacy laws. Ho, ho, ho. Is there any privacy in the United States? Haven't we determined that the various agencies of the U.S. government can spy on anyone for any or no reason? These experts also recommended the Biden administration push for access to the inner workings of social media algorithms used to rank feeds and recommend content. Roos then states that these experts warned that much more is needed to bring back the millions of already radicalized Americans who the essay claims are drawn to extremist groups like the Proud Boys and conspiracy theories like QAnon, not because they're convinced by the facts, but because the beliefs give them a sense of community or purpose or fills a void in their lives. Much like the belief in, say, white supremacy. Clark also recommends de-escalation ads that target, quote, high-risk potential violent extremists with empathetic messages about mental health and mindfulness, unquote. Oh, we're back to this again. Yes. How long before supporters of QAnon get locked up in asylums? I suppose we'll have to wait another year or two for that. Christian Piccolini, a former skinhead who now runs an organization aimed at rescuing extremists from hate groups, says it is impossible to separate people's material conditions from their choice to join an extremist group or follow a deranged conspiracy theory like QAnon. We have to provide jobs, said Piccolini. We have to have access to mental health care. Again, mental health and education. Yeah. I don't know that I know of this Christian Piccolini. He may have been someone that I talked about on Luke Ford's old show. I'm curious how this works. Every couple of months or so, some famous supporter of some extremist group or some conspiracy group, someone you have never heard of, pops up to say that he's seen the light. And I can't imagine how I believed in all that utter nonsense before. I have an organization now, and and who is funding these organizations, one wonders. Seth Dillon, who is CEO of the excellent satirical site, the Babylon Bee, tweeted, the reality czar will tell you 2 + 2 = 5, and unity will demand that you agree with him. Chris Abraham tweeted, realities are, wait, which side is totalitarian again? Mark's, yeah, okay. Mark Ames tweeted, LOL, this New York Times story pushing for a reality czar cites Rene DiResta, a director at New Knowledge, which was caught planting fake Kremlin bots on a GOP candidate's campaign, then getting the media to publish fake news about his Kremlin ties. Yeah, they are not satisfied with the fact that they won the election. They won the presidential election and now control both House of Representatives and the Senate. No. Opposition must be extirpated because, well, these people are crazy. And, well, wait a minute. I thought that we were supposed to end the stigma around mental illness. Yeah, but there's a kind of mental illness where you think that, your mother is controlling you through implanting thoughts in your brains. But, we should end the stigma around that. But people who believe in QAnon or who do not believe in white supremacy, yeah, that's the bad kind of mental illness. This is from Emily Jashinsky at The Federalist. Brian Stelter crossed what should be a bright red line for fellow journalists last Sunday. On reliable sources, the CNN host constructed an earnest argument advocating for technology companies to limit the reach of liars, defined by Stelter essentially as Fox News and conservative media. Quote, do these private companies have too much power? Sure. And many people will say, yes, of course. But reducing a liar's reach is not the same as censoring freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is different than freedom of reach. And algorithmic reach is part of the problem. While some cry cancel culture, let me suggest a different way to think about this, a harm reduction model, unquote. Jashinsky comments, this is a chilling and creepy statement, nakedly relabeling a noxious concept to make it more palatable. It should be disqualifying for a man in his position. Well, I would suggest that Emily Jashinsky take a look at my country of Canada, where for several years now, the media, not just the government-owned CBC, but the private media, has been calling for people who disagree with their narrative to be silenced, and then possibly, for criminal sanctions against them. Now, this is an obvious conflict of interest, but, never mind that. Jasinski continues, perhaps because Stelter and his peers in the corporate media have become accustomed to bossing Silicon Valley's politically hapless executives around, they forget those same hoodie-wearing oligarchs do not and will not always share their interests. By demanding these corporations wield their algorithms to lower the volume on liars now, they're asking big tech to create a system that would ultimately work against them. Yeah, maybe. Much of the corporate press has dispensed with the indispensable notion that more speech is better than less, so we're already beyond arguing that point. Stelter's demand that the tech industry assumes they will always accept his flawed definition of liars and disinformation, which doesn't seem to involve any of the Russian collusion hoaxers he lavished in praise for years. Yeah. Now, reach speech. Yeah, that's bad. We are in control of the truth. We determine what the truth is, and if you disagree with us, you are a liar. You are spreading misinformation or disinformation, perhaps at the behest of Russia. And you are almost certainly a white supremacist or neo-Nazi. Here's a story from Mediaite. Newsmax anchor literally walks off the set after trying to stop a raging Mike Lindell from spewing conspiracies about voting machines. In order to keep YouTube happy, I should just mention here that Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. legitimately won the presidential election on November 2nd, 2020, and any claims to the contrary are false. Conspiracy theories, misinformation. And there is no evidence whatsoever about any tinkering with voting machines. What I find curious about this is that, of course, I am constrained from, about what I can say on YouTube. This network, Newsmax, is supposed to be the fearless network that says what it believes. And I'm getting the impression that this talk that we've heard in recent weeks, and which I have discussed, that Newsmax, OANN, and perhaps even Fox should be dropped by cable providers has spooked Newsmax. And that so therefore they cannot allow someone like Mike Lindell to come on their network and speak against the narrative. This is how censorship works. You see, it's not necessary simply to slap down every person who speaks out against the hegemonic narrative. It's simply necessary to make them fear that they will suffer if they dare to disagree. And, I wanted to get to something here on Twitter that I saw that I found interesting. Yes, the newspapers and the cable news channels, they bring us the news that's important, right? Well, Eric Weinstein tweets, "How did this not come to my attention? Knowing that it happened, I can find references to it, but the algorithms don't see this as important as who stunned in what outfit." He's referring to a story from Alatia. As many as 750 killed in massacre at Ethiopian church. Weinstein concludes, why are mass killings of Christians not salient? Why are tech and media not especially highlighting this? Well, as I like to say, to ask the question is to answer it. That the media believes that Christians are the enemy, that Christians are the sole source of bigotry around the world. Although, I think the Buddhists are, making a play for that, because it turns out that the media is just absolutely furious that the Buddhists in both Sri Lanka and Burma have not surrendered to the demands of their opponents. The media has been pretty much cheering for the Tamil terrorists, Tamil Tigers, for years and years and years. As with the deep state, in any dispute, murderous dispute even, between Christians and Muslims, the media is going to be on the side of Muslims. Perhaps the media believes that Africa is not a Christian. Christians don't belong in Africa. Of course, Christians were in Africa long before Islam showed up. 600 years or so. In fact, Christians were in China before Buddhism, but that's not the sort of thing that you're likely to hear from the media. Let's see. Chokokin 666 says Axum Cathedral is the home of the Ark of the Covenant. Steve says, with regard to Newsmax, probably afraid of being sued for Dominion for slander. Okay. Levels of Maoism never thought possible, says Chokoken 666. Okay. Imagine going through life looking like Brian Stelter. We found out that Sean Hannity calls him Humpty after Humpty Dumpty. And we learned this from Brian Stelter himself. He earned a great deal of ridicule for that. If someone had given me a nickname such as that, I would not be announcing it to the hundreds of thousands who watch him on CNN. Tricky Who says AOC told police Kev was in the Capitol building. Oh, I don't even know that you should joke about that sort of thing. Roulette Crack said, we all know that claims of foreign interference in the elections is just a ridiculous conspiracy. Yeah, I don't know, except Jen Psaki, in her press conference today, was bringing this up. Oh, about America getting tougher with Russia. And America is still furious about Russian interference in the 2016 election, as well as the bogus story of bounties on American servicemen. Okay. Chokakin666 says Fox is revarnishing his throne. Okay. I haven't seen his site for several days. Okay, let's go back to it here. Reality. We're all in favor of reality, right? Now, the networks who have their news divisions railing against, conspiracy theorists, people who believe in lies, they're very big on so-called reality shows, which are not real. They are faked. Not only that, it has now become commonplace for so-called serious journalists at places like the Washington Post and elsewhere to deliver feverish recaps of last night's Bachelor or Bachelorette episode. Don't they know that these are completely faked? That none of these relationships last? None of them? There's a piece on CNNBC's Make It by Tom Huddleston Jr. The lure of making large sums of money by posting pictures online has turned the job of being a full-time social media influencer into one of the most aspirational career choices for young people around the world. Influencers on Instagram who have over 1 million followers can make more than $250,000 per post from brands, while someone like Kylie Jenner can make around $1 million from a single sponsored Instagram post. Okay, nothing unethical about that. Now, HBO's new documentary, Fake Famous, which premieres on Tuesday, that would be yesterday at 9 p.m., ET aims to show just how easy it can be to game the social media economy in order to become a famous online influencer. Here's a look at some of the tactics writer-director Nick Bilton uses to, as he put it, take some random people with a tiny following online and turn them into famous influencers. Spoiler alert, the experiment worked. You don't have to go to the dark web or anything. You just go to the straight-up internet and you can buy pretty much anything you want. Bilton says, as he takes out a credit card to buy thousands of fake followers or bots for the documentary's 3 subjects. Going through the website Famoid, which is one of several such sites that sell fake social media followers by the droves, Bilton says he paid about $120 to buy about 7,500 followers and 2,500 likes for one of the doc's guinea pigs, actress Dominique Druckmann. The bot followers are an algorithm that pretends to be a real person on the internet. These bots are created by hackers and programmers who write code that scour the internet to steal countless random identities by pilfering people's photos, names, and bios. Bilton estimates that there are hundreds of millions of bots online, and they can be used for any number of purposes, from foreign countries spreading misinformation around U.S. elections to making people, including aspiring influencers as well as already famous celebrities, appear more popular than they are. Yeah. I've heard repeatedly in recent months that the music charts are now fake, that these supposed sales are made up. Now, it used to be done in the old days, that people would show up at record stores and they would buy a whole bunch of copies of a record, and record stores reported their sales, or what they believed to be their sales. And this is how the charts used to be made. Since Nielsen SoundScan, the charts are supposed to be inviolable. But apparently the rise of the internet has meant that we can go back to the good old-fashioned days of the charts being rigged. And this is how it works. You get a record on the charts, so that means it gets played on the radio. So people think, well, if it's in the charts and it gets played on the radio, it must be good, and they go out and buy it. Let's talk about anti-hate speech. This is a story from the Burkean, which is in Ireland. Edmund Burke, having been an Irishman. Marketed as a multi-platform analytical tool to evaluate speech and facial patterns in order to create visual mapping for authorities and identity suspects, Roxanne is a new breed of surveillance technology in the process of development and currently being backed by both the Garda, that is the Irish police, and PSNI to bring into use. An acronym for Real-Time Network Text and Speaker Analytics for Combating Organized Crime. Wow, this acronym is nowhere close to what it stands for. If you're taking letters from the middle of a word repeatedly, yeah. A biometrics-based platform ostensibly to monitor and crack down on organized crime. An additional application of Roxanne, which its creators advertise freely, is the ability to monitor those guilty of alleged hate speech and political extremism. Organized crime. Yes, how long before so-called conspiracy theorists, who often, communicate with each other, are characterized as being part of organized crime, and then United States governments can RICO them to death. A product of the EU-funded Horizon 2020 to foster new surveillance technology, Roxanne works across social media sites such as Facebook, YouTube, as well as normal telecommunications platforms to identify, categorize, and track faces and voices, enabling authorities to paint a more in-depth picture of the network being investigated, whether it be in relation to criminal activity or those deemed politically extreme. Oh, so if you're deemed politically extreme, you have no privacy anymore. Enabling authorities to draw on raw data from a variety of sources and platforms in order to recognize common speech patterns, facial features, and geolocation. The end result is both to identify suspects and paint an intricate picture of the networks being put under the microscope. So what do we have here? Traces, wiretaps, social network, video recording. Under speech processing, speaker ID, multilingual automatic speech recognition, gender ID, language ID, age estimation, natural language processing, named entities, relations, vocabulary, video and geographical metadata processing, faces, objects, and environment. Oh, we see here objectives, feedback, decisions, rejecting incorrect hypotheses. Oh, man. So it's you don't need to be a conspiracy theorist. You just have to be guilty of rejecting or not rejecting an incorrect hypotheses. Oh, man. I don't know. Presumably, this technology is being used on me as I speak right now. Let's talk about Tom Brady. You may consider Tom Brady to be the greatest professional quarterback of all time. But on the other hand, he is white. Boo! This is from Warner Todd Houston at Breitbart. USA Today sports columnist Nancy Armour recently claimed that NFL star Tom Brady gets away with his mild support of President Trump because he is white. Left-wing sports writers have been trying to cancel Brady since the day a Donald Trump campaign hat was seen in his locker 5 years ago. The six-time Super Bowl winner also noted several times that he is friends with Trump. Still, Brady was never highly motivated by politics, and unlike other NFL players, he has never made a loud political proclamation a central point of his public persona. But despite this, in her article yesterday, Armour flamed Brady, saying how mighty white of him is that he more or less avoids too much politics. Armour's main accusation is that Brady avoids accountability for having been friendly with Trump, and he avoids this so-called accountability only because he is white. Quote, Brady's ability to enter and exit the debate at his choosing to shield himself from accountability is the height of white privilege. As this country grapples with the far reaches of systemic racism, look no further than Brady, for whom the expectations and allowances granted will always be different. Oh, I see. So saying, I'm not really all that interested in politics is the height of white privilege. It's not necessary for you to say anything. Again, the old legal principle that silence, implies consent. No, you must support the narrative vocally. I mean, what about all the angry, outspoken times that Brady praised Black Lives Matter? Apparently, there aren't any. And that is, it's got to be white supremacism. Oh, by the way, Canada has declared the Proud Boys a terrorist group. As I mentioned earlier, Jen Psaki today announced that President Biden is looking into it. Breitbart continues. The question is accountability from whom? Why does Brady need to be held accountable for being friends with a duly elected U.S. president? And who is performing all this holding to account? Many other athletes issue a constant stream of political invective. For instance, LeBron James has advocated for the defunding of police, resulting in a jump in the murders of Black people nationwide, not to mention his support of the coronavirus policies that have destroyed the jobs of millions of minorities. Who is holding LeBron James accountable? Well, the writer here missed a trick, because LeBron James said last year, and this sounds made up, but it's not, that every time a Black American leaves his or her home, he or she are terrified because of all of the police looking to kill them. Now, this statement is so hyperbolic as to be, deranged, but I don't recall very many people holding King LeBron accountable for that. Naturally, Armour and her ilk continue to point to Colin Kaepernick as proof that Brady gets away with his politics. Well, Kaepernick is still on the outside of the NFL and looking, and that might be because of in his last year as a starting quarterback, his score was 52, which is pitiful. You want to be at least at the bottom, in the 70s and preferably in the 80s, 90s and above in the quarterback rating. Yes, Armour wrote, there is no end in sight to Colin Kaepernick's blackballing. Even though his protests to bring attention to police brutality of Black and brown people have proven to be an alarm we should not have ignored. WNBA players, who cares? Nobody cares. Nobody. A handful of lesbians had one of their own owners turn on them because they had the audacity to say Black Lives Matter and amplify the stories of Black and brown women killed by police, unquote. But Armour's comparison fails. Kaepernick nearly daily continues to push his left-wing politics on social media and in media reports. Yes, and he also gets paid by equipment companies. Oh, even Brady's aversion to talking about politics or current events is itself a form of privilege. Again, neo-Stalinism. Why aren't you supporting Black Lives Matter? Why aren't you supporting Biden? Why aren't you supporting the fight against misogyny, et cetera, et cetera? I mean, we're back to the days of Havel's greengrocer. And it wasn't all that long ago that the media generally took a dim view of communism. They were kind of soft on it, but a few of them would have dared to applaud what went on in the Soviet Union and in the Warsaw Pact countries. But life is full of surprises. Armour wrote, like other white athletes, Brady is seen as an individual in a way minority athletes never are. Because Megan Rapinoe is openly gay, she was always going to be asked to weigh in on issues affecting the alphabet people community. Does a day go by before Megan Rapinoe reminds us that she is a lesbian? Black and brown athletes are expected to have and share their opinions and experiences about racial injustice and discrimination. And you can imagine that after this happened, a army of feminist allies and simps rushed to Twitter to support Armour. One of those was Tara Sloan. Let's see, hashtag top of her game, and at Hometown Hockey on Sportsnet. Mom, Joy Drop, rock star in excess, bodhisattva, Scotian feminist, not everyone's cup of tea. And she has 40,000 followers. Recognize that being apolitical is a privilege, she instructs us. And there was some pushback from that, which, of course, women on Twitter, and I suppose there's some exceptions, do not realize that Twitter is a public platform. And if you're going to criticize someone for being white, you might expect white people to react negatively to that. Tara Sloan writes, my take is that you cannot be apolitical when you're marginalized. Sid has the luxury of fading into the background while a black player may not. Oh, really? Does she really expect us to believe that? They are never not seen as black. Yeah, say it loud, black and proud, Black History Month, etc., etc., etc. So black people should be celebrated, and the talk should be Blacks 365, like McDonald's, and blackity black, 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 or they're supposed to fade in the background. I don't think everyone has to be political. I don't believe you, Tara Sloan, but recognize the inherent privilege in saying nothing. And I suppose one of the most distressing things about being, well, alive and sentient today is that people are succeeding. White people are succeeding and making money attacking other white people. Ugh, white people. Don't you just hate them? Well, by extension, shouldn't we hate you because you're white? Oh, I'm one of the good ones. No, but people like you are constantly telling us there are no good white people, that systemic racism is in our DNA. Yes, and Tara, she works for Sportsnet, which is one of Canada's two major cable sports station. And my advice, what I'm hoping for, is that Sportsnet and the other one, they just hire women like this, preferably, women of color with opinions like that, because I'm sure it will be, it might impact the ratings. But once again, can one put a price on justice? I say no. Let's go back to the chat. Anron says the Biden regime, not administration. Ricardo Williams says Vox Q Day definitely can't see anything coming. Okay. What else do we have here? Roulette Cracked says Tom Brady's silence is deafening. I'm not visiting his greengrocer store. Ogan's Iron says, I speak out against the socially acceptable race hatred in real life, and I use my privilege to do so. Once again, if white supremacy existed, people like Tara Sloan and this Armor from USA Today would not be tolerated. But again, Schrodinger's cat. On the one hand, white supremacism is all powerful. It's endemic. It's ineluctable. On the other hand, what about all these people screaming about how much they hate white people and their privilege? Even, increasingly, white people themselves. Max Vitriol says, speaking of the Garda, KMG should do a movie Thursday on the Guard. I have heard good things about that movie, and I will definitely check it out. Edmund Burke was Anglo-Irish, was he not? Catholic mother, Protestant father, that sort of deal. Might be misremembering. I don't know Anglo-Irish. That's sort of a troublesome term. Like Anglo-Indian. Anglo-Indian used to refer to people like Rudyard Kipling. More lately, Anglo-Indian has referred to people like Sir Ben, the actor, who are half Indian, East Indian, and half British. Roulette Crack says, I want to dress up in drag and call myself Alexis Jones and claim that Handmaid's Tale is coming whilst waving the Bible. I have the documents. Oh, some comment about Joy Division. Was the last authentic live performer. Everything since then has been fake and effeminate. Well, that's a bold statement. Do you see that Queen Latifah is starring in a reboot of The Equalizer? Did you see that? I've seen numerous promos for it, and in one of the shots, someone is saying, the agency wants you back. They say that you were the best of the best. They really said that? Because the CIA is made up of people who go around shooting people, you know? There's a few people in the CIA who do that. Actually, Trump took that power away from them. But most of these people in the CIA are analysts. But I suppose, you know, that everything can be rebooted to make it more representative, you know, the way we live now. They did that with Star Wars, and it was a tremendous success. No, actually, it was not a tremendous success. Yeah. So Queen Latifah, she appeared on a few episodes of 30 Rock, where she played a Rhode Island member of Congress. I thought she was quite good in that because she was parodying the rhetorical hysteria of Black politicians. And I'm thinking, how long ago was that? Was that like 10 years ago or something? And you couldn't do that on television now. You simply couldn't do it because, oh, how dare you? Don't you understand the burden of white supremacy, et cetera, et cetera? I came up with some ideas for more reboots. Matlock, remember him? Andy Griffith, wore an ice cream suit, liked to eat. Apparently old people love him. That's what the Simpsons tell me. Gabourey Sidibe. Lena Dunham as Cannon. Laverne Cox as Perry Mason. Kristen Stewart as Mannix. RuPaul as the Rifleman. And Amy Schumer as Murder, She Wrote's Jessica Fletcher. I don't know. Obviously, they sound ridiculous, but much that has sounded ridiculous in recent years has come to pass, and I don't expect that trend to stop anytime soon. So apparently, the United States of America now has federal mask cops because, you know, of course they do. Oh, yes. I forgot to mention this. I had to open it in Tor because I can't access the US version of Google from Canada. It always defaults me to the Canadian version. But I found out this comedian, very funny, ginger fellow with long hair, calls himself JP, that when you go to Google News in the United States now, on the right-hand column, you get fact-checked. Yeah, because Google is not a publisher. It's a platform. How many times do we have to say that before you believe it? Let's see, fact check. Video uses bogus claims to stoke race-based fears of COVID-19 vaccine. Viral video falsely claims U.S. President Biden signed blank executive orders. Fact check. Can Joe Biden eliminate all healthcare debt by executive order? Did McConnell say Marjorie Taylor Greene's opinions are a cancer for the Republican Party? Fact check. That's from Snopes, and they're oh so reliable. Oh, and here's one from Agence France Presse. Fact check. The image has circulated since 2019 and reports about a woman arrested for murder in Argentina. Yeah, that I know people never stop talking about that one. I don't. I'm sorry. I don't get it. This is from Elizabeth Nolan Brown at Reason. Cue the federal mask cops. Americans are now required to wear masks in planes, trains, buses, subways, taxis, car services, boats, and transportation hubs per a new order from the Centers for Disease Control that took effect today. Masks must be of a style approved by the federal government and must fit properly. Failure to comply will result in being prohibited from traveling, booted from the transit in question, and potential criminal penalties. The order will be enforced by the Transportation Security Administration, a government agency which is already beloved in America. TSA agents and other federal authorities, as well as state and local officials, to the extent permitted by law, federal agencies are required to implement additional measures enforcing the provisions of this order. CDC reserves the right to enforce through criminal penalties. The agency adds, though it claims not to intend to rely primarily on these criminal penalties. The feds may also implement additional civil measures enforcing the provisions of the order, which is not a rule within the meaning of the Administrative Procedure Act, but is rather an emergency action. So wait a minute. It's not clear in this story, but am I supposed to believe that if one gets on a bus in New York City and travels, a few miles down the road, that the federal government is enforcing you wearing a mask? How could that possibly be constitutional? But I don't know. Silly me asking a question like that. Did anyone, object when Michelle Obama was made the czar, as it were, of America's schoolroom lunches? I don't recall that power of the president's wife in the Constitution. But, there have been a lot of changes to that document over the years. Let's go to a lockdown skeptics vaccine update. The Russian vaccine Sputnik 5, which no one is quite sure they can trust, has been found to have 91.6% efficacy against COVID-19 and to be well tolerated in a large cohort, according to trial results published yesterday in The Lancet. It has also been deemed to be safe and offer complete protection against hospitalization and death. The vaccine was initially met with some controversy after being rolled out before the final trial data had been released. But scientists said its benefit has now been demonstrated. It joins the ranks of proven vaccines along Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Moderna, and Janssen. I'm wondering about this. If governments insist, and they seem to be insisting, that people must get the jab, can one say, no, I don't want one of those mRNA vaccines. I want a traditional vaccine. Is the government going to let you get away with that? Of course, in Canada, we have a big vaccine problem because last year the Trudeau government decided to farm this out. That is, creating and manufacturing vaccines to China. Yeah, to China. And guess what? They didn't deliver to China because that would just be logical. Let's see. Dr. Julian Tang, a clinical virologist at the University of Leicester, suggested the rollout of the vaccine in Russia before the trial was complete had now been justified by the subsequent results. This seems to misunderstand how safety trials work, in that getting lucky doesn't mean you were right to take the risk. Is this going to become the norm now? That drugs are going to be released routinely before clinical trials have concluded? Boy, I can't see anything going wrong with that. Let's see. In this likening of Britain's approach to COVID vaccines to Russia's, Dr. Tang seemed inadvertently to agree with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who has accused Britain and other quick off-the-mark countries of compromising on safety and efficacy. In other developments, there's fresh news on the Oxford vaccine, which appears to be more effective than early results suggested, particularly when doses are given 12 weeks apart. The study also suggested the vaccine reduces transmission by 67% after the first jab, not really surprising given the rarity of asymptomatic transmission. It means those who have been vaccinated are unlikely to infect those yet to receive the jab, paving the way for the early lifting of restrictions. Oh, and guess what? Lockdown states suffer more COVID deaths on average. And wow, Who's at the top? Who's at the top of COVID deaths per million? Number one, New Jersey. Strictest lockdowns in America. Number two, New York. Lockdown king. Governor death. Number three, Massachusetts. Well. Of course, we know that lockdowns work because the politicians listen to the bureaucrats who tell them that lockdowns work. How do they know lockdowns work? Because they use models. They take black boxes and put certain assumptions into them, such as that lockdowns work. So, there were 11 states in the U.S. which refused to lock down this autumn and winter. The doomsday models turned out by SAGE, Imperial College, and others predicted that any country, region, or state that declined to lock down would face hospital overruns and massive death tolls compared to those that did lock down, as the virus, no longer controlled by the restrictions, ripped through the population. Perhaps the authors of such models would care to explain this then. The chart above shows the COVID death toll per million people up to February 1st of the no lockdown American states. In red, if the doomsday models are correct, why don't the bars for those states clearly stand out from the bars of the lockdown states in blue? Furthermore, why are the top 5 states for COVID deaths lockdown states? In fact, the lockdown states on average had 5.6% more deaths than the no lockdown states. If anything, this suggests lockdown made things worse at any rate. There's no sign it helped. Oh, and I mentioned JP, the YouTube satirist. His latest video is, to a large extent, it has to do with Gavin Newsom. And yes, Gavin Newsom has lifted the lockdown, despite the fact that the number of cases has soared. And the reason that the lockdowns were instituted because the number of cases had soared. And he suggests, quite irresponsibly, I must say, that Newsom lifted the lockdown because there is a recall effort against him, which is only, I believe, 200,000 signatures away from forcing a recall election. Predictions of hospitals in London being overwhelmed fail to materialize. Yes, and this keeps happening again and again, but maybe next time the hospitals will be, overwhelmed. Perhaps they could add more beds then, if they really worry about that. Perhaps they could hire more doctors. I don't know. That would be too logical. Simply too logical. And finally, on this topic, I'm going to go to Alex Berenson. He said that this madness has to end soon because it's madness. And as I tweeted this to him, that people in the Soviet Union thought, that the madness of Stalinism would have to end. And guess what? It went on for 25 years until his death, actually. Shep Smith has a tweet. This shocking video from Sam Brock of NBC shows a market in Naples, Florida, where many customers' employees are not wearing face masks. Florida does not have a mask mandate, but the CDC has said that wearing masks can help control the COVID pandemic. And of course, that is definitely the job of TV newscasters, is just to disseminate government propaganda. Berenson comments, shocking, I say. Why videos like this explain why Florida has fewer COVID deaths than the U.S. average and far fewer than states with tough mask rules like New York. Hold on there, Shep. You said fewer. You meant more, right? Let's see. Someone had sent a report. My wife got the vaccine 18 days ago, and now her tongue is burning and covered with tiny sores, something that others are calling COVID tongue. As adverse reactions go, it's not too bad. The real problem is that we can't use the search engines to research the condition because they all serve up happy talk about how the vaccines are perfectly safe. Berenson comments, I cannot confirm COVID tongue. Perhaps others can. However, I can confirm it is nearly impossible to search for vaccine adverse events on Google or Facebook. I wonder why that would be. Finally, fun with math from Justin Fox. If 67% of the population needs to be immune to COVID-19 to reach herd immunity, and vaccines are 50 to 70% effective against transmission, then we need to vaccinate 96 to 134% of the population to reach herd immunity. Seems like a lot. Berenson comments, yes, but if everyone is wearing 3 masks and is swabbed weekly in an orifice of his or her choice, and the schools are closed forever, will Molly Jong Fast finally get to have dinner with John Weaver at the Stonewall? Inquiring minds want to know. I'm going to go back to the Machiavellians now, and the Machiavellian tradition. James Burnham writes, Machiavelli lived and wrote during a great social revolution through which feudal society, its economy, political arrangement, and culture were replaced by the first stage of capitalist society. The ruling class. That's where we are today. It is characteristic, and we're going to talk about Gaetano Mosca. It's characteristic of Machiavellian political analysis to be anti-formal, using formal in the sense which I've defined in the discussion of Dante's De Monarchia. That is, Machiavellians, in their investigations of political behavior, do not accept at face value what men say, think, believe, or write. Whether it is the speech or letter or book of an individual, or a public document such as a constitution or set of laws or a party platform, Machiavellians treat it as only one fact among the larger set of social facts and interpret its meaning always in relation to those other facts. In some cases, examination shows that the words can be accepted just as they stand. More often, as we found with De Monarchia, the divorce between formal and real meaning is discovered, with the words distorting and disguising the real political behavior which they indirectly express. This anti-formal approach leads Mosca to note as a primary and universal social fact the existence of 2 political classes, a ruling class, always a minority, and the ruled. Quote, among the constant facts and tendencies that are to be found in all political organisms, one is so obvious that it is apparent to the most casual eye. In all societies, from societies that are very meagerly developed and have barely attained the dawnings of civilization, down to the most advanced and powerful societies, 2 classes of people appear, a class that rules and a class that is ruled. The first class, always the less numerous, performs all political functions, monopolizes power, and enjoys the advantages that power brings. Whereas the second, the more numerous class, is directed and controlled by the first, in a manner that is now more or less legal, now more or less arbitrary and violent, and supplies the first, in appearance at least, with material means of subsistence and with the instrumentalities that are essential to the vitality of the political organism. In practical life, we all recognize the existence of this ruling class. We know that in our own country, whichever it may be, the management of public affairs is in the hands of a minority of influential persons, to which management, willingly or unwillingly, the majority defer. We know that the same thing goes on in neighboring countries, and in fact, we should be put to it to conceive of a real world otherwise organized, a world in which all men would be directly subject to a single person without relationships of superiority or subordination, or in which all men would share equally in the direction of political affairs. If we reason otherwise in theory, that is due partly to inveterate habits that we follow in our thinking, unquote. Burnham comments, the existence of a minority ruling class is, it must be stressed, a universal feature of all organized societies of which we have any record. It holds no matter what the social or political forms, whether the society is feudal or capitalist or slave or collectivist, monarchical or oligarchical or democratic, no matter what the constitutions and laws, no matter what the professions and beliefs. Mosca furthermore believes that we are fully entitled to conclude that this not only has been and is always the case, but also it will always be. That it will be follows in the first place from the univocal experience of the past. Since under all conditions it has always been true of political organization, it must be presumed that it is a constant attribute of political life and will continue to hold for the future. However, the conclusion that there will always be a minority ruling class can be further demonstrated in another way. By the theory of the ruling class, Mosca is refuting 2 widespread errors which, though the opposite of each other, are oddly enough often believed by the same person. The first, which comes up in discussions of tyranny and dictatorship and is familiar in today's popular attacks on contemporary tyrants, is that society can be ruled by a single individual. But, Mosca observes, The man who is at the head of state would certainly not be able to govern without the support of a numerous class to enforce respect for his orders and to have them carried out. And granting that he can make one individual, or indeed many individuals in the ruling class, feel the weight of his power, he certainly cannot be at odds with the class as a whole or do away with it. Even if that were possible, he would at once be forced to create another class, without the support of which action on his part would be completely paralyzed, unquote. The other error, typical of democratic theory, is that the masses, the majority, can rule themselves. Mosca writes, "It is easy to understand that a single individual cannot command a group without finding within the group a minority to support him. It is rather difficult to grant as a constant and natural fact that minorities rule majorities rather than majorities minorities. But that is one of the points, so numerous in all the other sciences, where the first impression one has of things is contrary to what they are in reality. In reality, the dominion of an organized minority obeying a single impulse over the organized majority is inevitable. The power of any minority is irresistible as against each single individual in the majority who stands alone before the totality of the organized minority. At the same time, the minority is organized for the very reason that it is a minority. 100 men acting uniformly in concert with a common understanding will triumph over 1,000 men who are not in accord and can therefore be dealt with one by one. Meanwhile, it will be easier for the former to act in concert and have a mutual understanding simply because they are 100 and not 1,000. It follows that the larger the political community, the smaller will be the proportion of the governing minority to the governed majority be, and the more difficult it will be for the majority to organize for reaction against the minority," unquote. Nor is this rule at all suspended in the case of governments resting in form upon universal suffrage, or what we call today democracy. Mosca writes, "What happens in other forms of government, namely that an organized minority imposes its will on the disorganized majority, happens also and to perfection, whatever the appearances to the contrary, under the representative system. When we say that the voters choose their representative, we are using a language that is very inexact. The truth is that the representative has himself elected by the voters. And if that phrase should seem too inflexible and too harsh to fit some cases, we might qualify it by saying that his friends have him elected. In elections, as in all other manifestations of social life, those who have the will, and especially the moral, intellectual, and material means to force their will upon others, take the lead over the others and command them. The political mandate has been likened to the power of attorney that is familiar in private law. But in private relationships, delegations of powers and capacities always presuppose that the principal has the broadest freedom in choosing his representative. Now, in practice, in popular elections, that freedom of choice, though complete theoretically, necessarily becomes null, not to say ludicrous. If each voter gave his vote to the candidate of his heart, we may be sure that in almost all cases, the only result would be a wide scattering of votes. When very many wills are involved, choice is determined by the most various criteria, almost all of them subjective, and if such wills were not coordinated and organized, it would be virtually impossible for them to coincide in the spontaneous choice of one individual. If his vote is to have any efficacy at all, therefore, each voter is forced to limit his choice to a very narrow field. In other words, to a choice among the 2 or 3 persons who have some chance of succeeding. And the only ones who have any chance of succeeding are those whose candidacies are championed by groups, by committees, by organized minorities," unquote. Burnham comments, "Few have paid attention to the political facts, who have paid attention to the political facts rather than to theories about those facts in the United States will disagree with the account as it applies to this country. Within the ruling class, it is usually possible to distinguish roughly 2 layers. A very small group of top leaders who among themselves occupy the highest and key positions of the society, and a much larger group of secondary figures, a middle class, as it could be called, who, though not so prominent nor so much in the limelight, constitute the day-to-day active directors of the community life. Just as Mosca believes that the individual supreme leader is unimportant to the fate of society compared to the ruling class, so does he believe that this secondary level of the ruling class is, in the long run at least, more decisive at the top." Yes, I wonder if that has been superseded by events, because if you look at your elected representatives, increasingly you see people who have had no other occupation in their entire lives than politics, that they have been aides, backroom boys or girls, that they have worked for NGOs, to make political change, that they have become PR spivs, that is to say, they lobby with politicians. Increasingly, politicians are an entirely separate class who are deliberately estranged from the great majority. Mosca continues, below the highest stratum in the ruling class, there is always, even in autocratic systems, another that is much more numerous and comprises all the capacities for leadership in the country. Without such a class, any sort of social organization would be impossible. Again, this is true, but, as I just mentioned, if you're dealing with a political class, which is, I don't know, it's not quite a hereditary aristocracy, but it's getting close to that. Again, these people, when one talks to them coming from a community, the community that they come from is the political community and no other. And even those people who claim to come from, humble beginnings, well, if you've been involved in politics since, I don't know, you started university at 17 or 18, one quickly loses touch with where one comes from. Increasingly, politicians find it impossible to understand the needs of people who are not, wealthy, or if they or poor people who have significant, one might say, to use a phrase of Tom Wolfe's, Mao-Maoing power. Burnham writes, from the point of view of the theory of the ruling class, a society is the society of its ruling class. A nation's strength or weakness, its culture, its powers of endurance, its prosperity, its decadence, depend in the first instance upon the nature of the ruling class. More particularly, the way in which to study a nation, to understand it, to predict what will happen to it, requires first of all and primarily an analysis of the ruling class. Political history and political science are thus predominantly the history and science of the ruling class. Yes, their origins, development, composition, structure, and changes. The theory of the ruling class in this way provides a principle with the help of which the innumerable and otherwise amorphous and meaningless facts of political life can be systematically assembled and made intelligible. Yeah, well, let's look at the ruling class of America. Now, Donald Trump is a rich man, but he made his riches in the real estate business. Donald Trump was not involved in politics until 2015. Nancy Pelosi, who has been in politics pretty much her entire life, but she and her husband are worth somewhere between $200 and $300 million. How did that happen? How is Dianne Feinstein so very rich? So rich that she has a Gulfstream to fly her from San Francisco to Washington and back again? How is it that people who have shown no skill whatsoever in the private sector become elected to office in the United States, and then, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 years later, it turns out that they're fabulously rich? What does this suggest? To me, it suggests corruption. The corruption of the entire system. Paul Ryan, when he quit as leader of the House of Representatives, did he go back to Wisconsin? No, he did not. He stays in Washington. John Nance Garner, who was FDR's vice president for his first two terms, became so disgusted with politics that he didn't vote in the 1940 election. And after the inauguration, he got on the train to Texas and never went back, never set foot in Washington, D.C. again. How strange that sounds, because everyone knows that the point of getting into politics is to become rich. That you can be like Janet Yellen and be paid $810,000 for doubtless dazzling speeches she made to one company, $810,000 in 1 year. Ooh, nothing untoward about that. Burnham writes, however arbitrary this idea of history as the history of ruling classes may seem to be, the truth is that all historians in practice, even such historians as Tolstoy or Trotsky, whose general theories directly contradict it, are compelled to write in terms of it. If for no other reason, this must be because the great mass of mankind leaves no record of itself, except insofar as it is expressed or led by outstanding and noteworthy persons. Nor does this method result in any falsification of the historical development. The account of a war cannot or need not cover what all or most part of the soldiers did, nor need the accounts of a school of art or the formation of a constitution or the growth of a religion or the progress of a revolution tell everything about everyone. Even if theory were to decide that ultimately the movements of the masses are the cause of what happens in history, yet these movements attain historical significance only when they alter major institutions and result in shifts in the character and composition of the ruling class. Thus, the analysis of the ruling class, if not directly, then indirectly, will produce an adequate history and an adequate political science. There is an ambiguity in Mosca's concept of the ruling class. Mosca considers himself a political scientist rather than a sociologist, and tries, some of the time, to restrict his field to politics rather than general social behavior. If literally translated from the Italian, his phrase would usually be political class or governing class rather than ruling class. In his writings, his meaning seems to shuttle between the narrower concept of a governing class, that is, the class directly or indirectly concerned with the specific business of government, and the more general concept of a social elite, that is, the class of all those in a society who are differentiated from the masses by the possession of some kind of power or privilege, many of whom may have no specific relation to government. However, this ambiguity does not affect Mosca's argument to any considerable degree, and if we judge by the context, the general concept of an elite is usually more appropriate to his meaning. What seems to have happened is that Mosca began his work in the narrower field of politics with the narrower concept in mind. His political inquiries then led him outward into the wider field of social action, since the political field could not be understood apart from the background of the whole social field. The idea of the political class expanded its meaning into the idea of a social elite without an explicit discussion of the change. In later Machiavellian thought, in Pareto particularly, the wider meaning of elite is consistently employed. We should further note that in stating the theory of the ruling class, Mosca is not making a moral judgment, is not arguing that it is good or bad that mankind should be divided into rulers and ruled. I recently read in a review by a well-known journalist that this country will never accept a theory of the elite, as if it is wicked to talk about such things and noble to denounce them. The scientific problem, however, is not whether a country or any other will accept such theories, but whether the theories are true. Mosca believes that the stratification of society into rulers and ruled is universal and permanent, a general form of political life. As such, it would be absurd to call it good or bad. It is simply the way things are. Moral values, goodness and badness, justice and injustice are indeed to be found, and Mosca does not try to avoid making moral judgments, but they are meaningful only within the permanent structure of society. Granted, there are always rulers and ruled, and then we may judge that the societies of some ruling classes are good, or more good, just, or less unjust than others. Yes, it's interesting that Burnham says that, some things are facts, which put them, beyond morality. I don't know that obtains anymore because, I don't know, when was it? About 20 years or so, we saw all over the Western world a push for homosexual marriage. Now, it is a fact that marriage is a union between a man and a woman, or in certain societies, several women. Marriage, by definition, is not between members of the same sex. But this was thought to be hurtful for some reason, notwithstanding the fact that governments had changed the laws such that homosexuals, men or women, who desired to make a legal union would receive all of the benefits of heterosexual married couples. No, their feelings were hurt. So the fact that something is a fact by definition was simply tossed out the window. Again, it was a fact, and yes, people are going to talk about hermaphrodites. This is a tiny, tiny, tiny number of people. You had men and women. No, that is not a fact. There are an infinite number of genders, and there is similarly an infinite number of gender expressions. So the very idea of fact has now largely, it's disappearing. despite all the fact checking that is going on. This fact checking is simply the exercise of political power. Whom? That's all it is. So tomorrow I'm going to be talking about the composition and character of the ruling class. But let's talk about Canada to wrap up. Canadian Olympic Committee board member rejects call for boycott of Beijing Olympics. This is by Stephen Chase, an old colleague of mine in the Globe and Mail. One of the Canadian Olympic Committee's most prominent board members says Canada should resist calls to boycott the 2022 Beijing Olympics over allegations of genocide in China or the imprisonment of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor. Richard Pound, who was president of the Canadian Olympic Committee in 1980, the last time Canada boycotted an Olympic Games, said in an interview that refusing to participate in 2022 would achieve nothing and only hurt Canadian athletes. He said probably 70% of Olympic athletes make it to just one Olympic Games. Young people gathering in troubled times to compete peacefully in sport. This is a message worth sending and a channel that is worth keeping open, even when the government folks aren't mad at each other. Well, he would say that, wouldn't he? I think the Olympics are evil, and I'll explain why. Why do people watch the Olympics? Because there's all sorts of sporting events. Track and field events go on every year. Well, they used to. And they're not all that popular on television. People are watching the Olympics because people are competing under the banners of specific countries. So that is to say, they are cheering for their country and cheering against another country. I remember the 1972 Olympics in Munich. The men's basketball final was between the United States and the Soviet Union. And the Americans were giving a poor showing of themselves. And people were shocked because it was supposed to be an easy victory. But they came from behind and they went ahead. And it looked like they were going to win the game. And suddenly there was a series of decisions by the referees. And no, the Russians win. What happened there? I was absolutely furious and thinking that, maybe we should just nuke the Soviet Union and get it over with. I can only imagine how Americans felt. Of course, in Central America, we have the famous soccer war. Yes, two countries in Central America went to war with each other over a disputed World Cup game. The Olympics are not privately paid for. These Olympic athletes are paid for. They have some private sponsors, but no, the governments step in. And thus, if this were a private get-together with no substantial government contribution, then sure, let them go to China. Let everyone go to China. And we know what the China Olympics is going to be. It's going to be a celebration of their disgusting regime, just as the 1936 Olympics in Berlin was a celebration of the disgusting regime of National Socialism. Yeah, you hear, this myth about Jesse Owens. Oh, that Jesse Owens humiliated Hitler. Who won the 1936 Olympics? Why? That was Germany. Germany didn't do too well in 1932. In 1936, they were far away the winner in gold medals and in total medals. And there is no question that the 1936 Berlin Olympics were an enormous propaganda triumph for Nazi Germany. Why is China willing to spend so much money on the Olympics? Because the return that they will get in propaganda greatly outweigh that. Oh, 70% of Olympic athletes make it to just one Olympic Games. Oh, dear. Oh, dear, dear, dear. Again, the Olympics used to be for, in amateur athletics itself, it used to be for young people. Increasingly, we see these athletes in their 30s and sometimes even in their 40s, that the Olympics was not supposed to be a professional career, but now it has become a professional career. But anyway, back to the Globe and Mail. Critics of China's human rights record in Canada and abroad have urged Western countries to pull their athletes from the 2022 Olympics. They cite China's crackdown on civil rights and the rule of law in Hong Kong, and its internment camps and forced sterilization from Muslim Uyghurs. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said China's actions constitute genocide. Oh, so China is committing genocide, so therefore Russia's not committing genocide. Why isn't the United States slapping all these penalties on China? Could it be that a great number of members of America's ruling class have become wealthy through connections with China? I'm sure it has nothing to do with that. A Canadian House of Commons committee condemned the treatment of the Uyghurs as genocide, and Arif Virani, the parliamentary secretary to Canada's Justice Minister and Attorney General, last fall told the Commons that it is genocide that appears to be taking place today in China. Don't hold your breath waiting for Canada to in any way attenuate its connections to the Communist Party of China. Pound said Canada tried to boycott already when the U.S. led 65 countries to skip the Moscow Olympics over the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan. He said it was devastating for Canadian athletes. We just ripped the guts out of our Olympians. They were so furious, what was then the Soviet Union, that they were going to teach them a lesson. Of course, it didn't get the Soviets out of Afghanistan at all. Pound said Canadians should understand that Beijing doesn't own the 22 games. They are not Chinese games. They are the International Olympic Committee's games, and they are being held in China. Ho, 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 ho. Let's see what's coming up on the show. Tomorrow is Theater Thursday, and I am going to be discussing Fritz Lang's 1931 classic M. On February 11th, I'm going to be talking about Perfect Movie, Don Siegel from 1973, Charlie Varick, starring Walter Matthau. In February 18th, I'll be discussing 12 O'Clock High, which is about American aviators in the Second World War, directed by Henry King, and stars Gregory Peck. On February 25th, I'm discussing I suppose what used to be called a woman's picture, Mildred Pierce, starring Joan Crawford, directed by Michael Curtiz from 1945. Well, it is a women's picture, I suppose you could say, but I would say that it is everyone's picture. It's quite good. And on March the 4th, I'm discussing a movie from 1966. I suppose it is the epitome of swinging London. Blow Up, starring David Hemmings and Vanessa Redgrave. And on the book club on Friday, I'm going to be discussing a book about the movie Goodfellas, Made Men by Glenn Kenny. February 12th, Nick Kent's Apathy for the Devil. February 19th, Between Two Millstones, Part 2 by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, which describes his years in America. On February 26th, COVID-19, The Great Reset by Klaus Schwab. No, this is not a conspiracy book. This is the head of the World Economic Forum talking about how the world has to be turned upside down. And on March 5th, I'm going to be discussing a new book by a clever young woman called Helen Andrews. It's called Boomers. Yes, I'm trembling already, being a boomer myself. I gather she's not too kind to my generation, and, well, God knows we deserve it. And on Music Monday, on February the 8th, which is next Monday, I'm going to be discussing the War of the Romantics. That is to say, the war that broke out amongst classical composers in Europe as to who were the legitimate heirs of Ludwig van Beethoven. On February 15th, Rock Managers, A Tale of Infamy. I suppose it would be shorter to talk about all the rock managers who aren't crooks, but I think I'm going to be talking about the crooks. On February 22nd, I'll be discussing Elgar and the Renaissance of English music. On March the 1st, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite bands, although they only made 3 records and they never sold any. Big Star, who I describe as beautiful losers. And on March the 8th, I'm going to be discussing Joseph Haydn, a true underdog story. So we'll final look at the chat here. Late boomers like Kevin will be shown mercy. Yeah, I don't know. There's a term, Generation Jones, which is applied to people like me. I noticed that we hated the hippies. All that peace, love, dope stuff. It was so corny. It was so ridiculous. And of course, the first Arab oil shock hit when I was, 18 years old. So the good times were coming to an end. Ashi Bravo says, what is going on in Myanmar with the supposed military coup? Well, apparently the United States government is unhappy. That's what I hear. I'm going to watch Pawn Sacrifice later. My uncle recommended it. Says Roulette Crack. Pawn Sacrifice. That's not the Queen's Gambit. Okay. All right. Josh Randall. Disavow says the last 4 years have driven me further towards God than any other period of my life. The world only offers fear, confusion, and lies. Steve says, I bet they will be the Chinese games if current trends continue. Tricky Who says, how dare you make jokes on the internet? You go away. Roulette Crack says, free the Uyghurs. Yeah, soccer war wasn't really over the game itself. It was a territorial and migration dispute that had been brewing for a long time. I know that, but it was the World Cup game that was the spark. Roulette Crack says, how is the MyPillow situation any different from signs being put in German shop windows in the 1930s? Okay, so that's it. I will be back on the air tomorrow at my usual time of 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I would appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, very much appreciated, especially at this great time of turmoil in my life. My PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you're Canadian, you can make a donation to this live stream directly via Interact to kevingrace@shaw.ca. And I shall leave you with this. As always, in these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear listeners and viewers, manage to form a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.